Hi, I'm Marlie-Elizabeth Molly, and this is Relationship Alchemy. Today, we are talking about the alchemy of divorce with Wendy Sterling. Wendy helps women see how their divorce can be the most empowering experience they go through. She helps them find their true identity and voice to design a life they choose instead of feeling stuck with the one they have. Wendy is the creator of the Divorce R.E.H.A.B, a 5-step program to reclaim your identity, end your victim mindset, label your wounds, find acceptance through accountability, and build a life from an empowered mindset. Wendy is also the host of the podcast, The Divorced Women's Guide, and she has generously had me on the podcast, so do go check out that podcast. Our episode was fire, and I'm just so excited to welcome you to the show today, Wendy.
Thank you, Marlie-Elizabeth. I'm so honored to be here and to have the opportunity to connect and chat with you again.
I love it every time we get to chat.
Me too.
Tell me a bit about your story. How did you end up working with women who are divorced or divorcing?
Sure. So it brings me back to that moment about 5.5 years ago when my now ex-husband and I were driving home from a couple's night out. And at the time, I had been building a 20-year career in corporate America in the world of ad sales. He's an attorney, and our boys were 7 and 10 at the time. And in that moment in the car driving home, the phone rang very late at night, not once, but 5 times from the same female colleague. And it was in that moment that all of a sudden my intuition just punched me in the gut harder than it has ever felt in my life. And I knew in that moment that something was not right. And of course, I got the courage to confront him and to figure out if indeed my intuition was right. And of course, my worst nightmare came true and realized that my husband of 16 years was having an affair. And instead of looking at it as an opportunity to just stick it to him, I saw it as an opportunity for me to start understanding why I had fallen asleep at the wheel. I had really lost myself in my marriage. I didn't know who I was because my entire identity was wrapped up in not just who he saw me as, but in my identity as wife, as mom, as coworker, sister, daughter. And at the end of the day, looking in the mirror, I had no idea who Wendy was. And so what my divorce really gifted me that first year of separation was the opportunity to really discover and find myself. Been in therapy, and it just wasn't moving me forward or helping me to create a vision for a life I wanted, because we had been together since we were 18. And so my whole adult life was wrapped into this man. And so it really, the universe works in very mysterious ways. And lo and behold, I saw a Facebook post about life coaching. And after exploring it more, realized that that was another intuitive hit that was coming to me. The universe was showing me my path. And so not only did I enroll in becoming certified as a life coach, but I also hired one to help me move through the pain that I was experiencing. And I had moved through so much more in the course of a couple of weeks than I had the entire 8 months before in therapy. And so I knew that there was something special with this world of life coaching. And on top of it, I'm a very spiritual person and also started exploring different spiritual modalities and ways to also heal, because I do believe that my ex-husband and I were connected in multiple past lives together and couldn't get him off of me spiritually. Like I could always feel him. And so what I wound up doing as my own path of recovery was creating my own program, because nothing really existed out there. And so that's how the Divorce R.E.H.A.B was born. And I decided to take the leap of faith and not only file for divorce, but to also leave my 6-figure paycheck and my 20-year career to launch my business and to bring Divorce R.E.H.A.B to the masses, and, to just preach my mission that divorce is one of empowerment instead of feeling shame and embarrassment, and, seeing it as something that happens for you instead of falling victim to it. So now I'm privileged that I get to do this work and to support and help so many people and to show them how they too can convert their pain into purpose.
That's gorgeous. I love the turning pain into purpose. It's so powerful. And your story is so powerful because you really came to this purpose from the inside out, and I want to hear, I just love the name Divorce Rehab. And I know rehab is an acronym. I'd love to hear more about the steps that you take women through. What are these 5 steps that you feel are the ones that can bring them out of their pain and into their purpose?
Of course. So step number 1 is the R, right? So rehab. The R is all about reclaiming your identity and voice. So what a lot of that means is learning to distinguish what is important to you versus what was important to who you thought you were in your marriage. So I do a lot of work with my clients around understanding what their values are, because at our core identity are our values. And, once people identify them, it's pretty easy to see why your marriage didn't work out, right? My number
Absolutely.
1 value was honesty. And my husband cheated on me. So lo and behold, right, this wasn't the relationship for me. So we spend a lot of time.
And also you had said you lost yourself in the relationship.
Yes.
So there's a way that you weren't being honest either, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
100%. And I wasn't being honest with myself, and I wasn't honoring my values in any way. I also didn't understand where I ended and he began, right? So many times.
When you're so meshed, is that what you're talking about? When you get so enmeshed like that?
Exactly. When you just, we became, Wendy and James. There was never Wendy or just James. It was Wendy and James. I was just immediately put into this identity. And growing up, I grew up living into an image that I thought my family had of me. And so there was this combination of, I had learned this growing up, and then here I was doing the same thing really in my marriage. And so a big part of that reclaiming process is also learning and beginning to understand where your boundaries are as it relates to the values that you get to honor and uphold.
So powerful.
Thank you. It is. It's really, nobody teaches this, right? You don't go to school and you learn about your values, or you learn what a boundary is, right? So many life skills I learned in my 40s, and it's never too late, and that's fine. But once we take that first step forward, then what we do is the E. And the E is all about ending your victim mindset. It is about ending the pity party, right? Stop throwing out invitations and inviting more people and creating a rager, in your world. That's the opposite of what's going to support you. I was just talking to somebody about this, this victim mindset, and it's really about, you are blaming everybody else and you're not taking responsibility. And so a big piece is really owning, right? Shifting into ownership of how it is that you contributed to your marriage. And instead of pointing the finger, and instead of, having the mindset of, woe is me, oh my God, what am I going to do? He did this to me. You really have to shift that and start owning your role. 50%. You own 100% of your 50%, right? I don't own a single choice that my now ex-husband made, right? I own 100% of my choices and how I showed up. So it's really important we spend a lot of time in the E because it's a big hurdle to overcome. And a lot of it comes with self-awareness.
Yes.
Then we move into the third step, which is the H, and that is all about healing your wounds. So this is really where, a lot of times people don't understand the grief that comes with divorce. And grief is something that I believe is worse in divorce, because you're not just dealing with the death of one person. You are dealing with the death of your marriage, your best friend, the future, the visions that you had, the financial security, in my case, attending, milestone events with our kids as a married couple, presenting ourselves, having grandkids together. And so what people don't understand, or what I don't believe we allow ourselves space for, is really the opportunity to sit in grief and to learn how to move through it. Mm-hmm. What I always say, people are like, well, I just want to be done, right? I just want to get through this. I don't want to feel this anymore. And so what do? Well, they try to avoid feeling. It comes up, they walk away. It comes up, they walk away. The secret, everybody, the shortcut to getting this over with is actually allowing yourself to feel through it all.
Absolutely.
Whatever comes up, just let yourself lean into it, acknowledge it, name it, feel it, and then shift, right?
Yeah.
It's really about taking yourself into, the feelings of it, which I feel like as a society, we've kind of been told, especially as women, sit there, smile, be pretty. At least that was my experience. And so I never really learned how to feel. And I never learned how to feel what was authentic to me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt what other people expected me to think or feel. So after we move through the healing of your wounds, a lot of that too is also learning how to love yourself, right? We forget how important it is for us to, relationship with yourself is the most important.
Is the foundational relationship.
Exactly. And we don't know how to do that. I didn't know what love felt like because I didn't love myself. Even though I was unhappy in my marriage and we were in counseling and I thought that, I knew I was moving forward, can't take responsibility or tell you what he was doing in that process. But I was learning how to, I was learning communication. I was learning language, that some of you may think is quite, quote unquote, simple. But to me, it was so foreign. And I didn't know what I loved about myself because all I saw was I'm a failure. I broke up my family. Because I chose the divorce, right? He wasn't in that position to own that choice. So I made it for both of us and it was mine. And I didn't really see past the flaws, right? All the flaws that I chose to focus on, right? Choosing to see glass half empty instead of seeing the glass half full. And until you can really love yourself, and I mean, you're the expert in this, but until you can really love yourself, it's really hard for you to know what receiving love feels like from the outside, and also standing in your power of knowing what your worth is.
Absolutely. And it's also hard to invite the love you desire from somebody else if you don't know what that feels like.
Exactly.
So you end up accepting sort of a mimic of love that might be culturally defined or what your family looked like, but is not necessarily the love that feeds you.
Exactly.
And you teach that so beautifully, that shift.
Thank you. Yeah. And that's where our worth comes from, right? So many women that I coach and that I speak to, lack of self-confidence, lack of self-worth. And so many of my clients, we work on the phrase, I am enough. And my enough gets to be different every single day. And until you really know yourself, until you love every piece of yourself, it's really hard to build back that self-esteem, to build back the confidence, to see your worth. Because without that, I mean, really, I used to be there and I wasn't living a life. I wasn't numb. I was on autopilot. I really started living my life in my 40s, what felt like, like where I really felt like I was in my own skin. How many of you guys listening, or even, you, Marlie-Elizabeth, like how many times can you think back into your marriage and go like, wow, I just really was not being myself. And like, wow, I felt like fish out of water, but here I was pretending, faking it.
Trying to do it right.
Exactly. Trying to do what everybody is expecting, right? I call it the Facebook facade, where,
to be good,
to look picture perfect. And now anytime I'm on Facebook, and I tell my friends this all the time, and I talk about this all the time, anytime I see a happy family posing, I'm going, there's something wrong behind closed doors in that family. So versus the ones who have kids looking all over the place, I'm like, yeah, that's real life, right?
Like they're fine. They're fine.
They're doing just fine. It's the people who have the picture perfect. I'm like, you're wanting people to, and I know that because I did it. Yeah. That was me. And I wanted so bad for everybody else to see what I wanted us to be, because if it's on social media, like it's real, so really moving out of that and really healing around kind of, opening your eyes to what was really going on instead of what you wanted to believe was happening.
Gorgeous.
And so then once we move through that process, step number 4 is the A in rehab. And that is really all around taking accountability and moving into acceptance. So there is a difference between responsibility and accountability. And with accountability, it is the missing piece to the puzzle when everyone is going through this divorce recovery process. We are our own worst accountability partners. And what accountability means is holding yourself to the fire that you are going to actually take action, right? Yes, you get to take responsibility. And that's step number 1. Beyond responsibility is, okay, I take responsibility for not communicating in the best of ways. I take responsibility for picking fights to get attention. And I'm committed to moving forward to acknowledge my emotions in real time and come up with language that is polite and respectful. So I am holding myself accountable to slowing down, being respectful, being thoughtful the next time around. So until you take the responsibility, right? And then you get to move into accountability. This is the action phase where how is it that I am going to now bring this out into the world? How do I get to show up differently? What am I going to do differently next time? And putting you into actual real life practice around that. And that to me, right? The action, the real life process is what enables you to accept where it is that you are and how it is that you got here, right? Acceptance is hard for a lot of us, right? Accepting your divorce status, call it single status, right? I'm totally going on a tangent right now, but it makes me think about when I go to the doctor's office now, there's a form that says divorced, single, married, widowed. What's the difference between divorced and single? I would love to know.
Yeah, I would love to know that too.
Does my insurance policy not cover me if I'm single versus divorced? Is that the same thing? Anyways, I diverge. However, moving into acceptance is really after you've moved into action, you are now owning where it is that you are in your life, and you are taking committed action to showing up in the world differently. And in order for you to do that, right, you have to go through all these other steps first. You can't just jump to acceptance and just be like, well, it was my choice, whatever, I'm better off. Here we go. I accept it. Let's move on. That's not how this works. And it doesn't matter if your divorce was amicable or not, because ultimately you can't get to step 5, which is the B, which is about building, right? So now you accept your life. You accept where you've gotten. You have accepted how you get to do life differently. So now you get to build. That's the fun part, the blank canvas. Oh, scary and magical. Yeah. And so that's where you get to build this new life, designing it, not asking permission. Oh, what a blessing. I don't have to ask anybody anything. I can make decisions by myself, and seeing the power that slowly gets built through these 5 steps is magical and truly rewarding, and why I keep doing this work.
Yeah, it's so gorgeous. And I love how you talk about the process, how each step really builds on the step before, because you're so right. We want to rush it. We want to get to the other side. We want to just be done with the grief and be building already. But if you haven't done all of these steps and really come to a real acceptance, not a veneer of acceptance, as many of us can tend to try to create, it's just not going to be real or sustainable.
No. And we don't, it's not like we get married and we take a divorce, right? It's like, okay, you get pregnant, we'll go take a baby class. Okay, go buy this book. Okay. When you get married, you don't have the mindset that you're ever going to get divorced. I married who I thought was my soulmate at the time. And he was one of apparently many that I was supposed to have in this lifetime, and I will tell you guys, we went from a non-amicable place to one where we are wonderful co-parents. We have a friendship rooted in co-parenting. And it makes such a difference when you go through these steps to be able to come out on the other side and see the possibility of what a new type of a relationship can look like with your ex. For those of us that have kids, obviously, that is inevitable. Once a co-parent, always a co-parent. And even still, like I have clients that I work with who didn't have kids and, they still maintain like a distance friendship, but there's a scale on which it comes to fruition. But what I always say is that where it is that you are today doesn't mean that that's where you're going to be in 6 months or a year or 3 years. The difference is that if you want to accelerate that process, that's where asking for help from people who have been through it is so incredibly important, and learning how it is that, you're showing up. I did a leadership program and it was so powerful in that I got to see other people actually reflect back to me what their experience of me was. And it was shocking because I was like, really? I would never use that word to describe me. And it didn't feel good.
Yeah.
And it made me really aware of what people's perception is of you based on how it is that you're showing up. Because clearly I was still in bitterness and anger and resentment, and man, was that showing through. But I was like, I got this. I don't need, you know.
Totally. Yeah.
And so a lot of times it's really helpful to have somebody there guiding you and really, calling you out on your BS. And that's what I do best. So
it's so key. I want to ask you, I've heard you speak before about the transition that co-parenting divorcing couples need to make from relating to your husband as a wife to now relating to your ex-husband as a co-parent. Like you're stepping from the wife role into the mom role, I've heard you call it. Would you say a bit about that transition? Because that really sparked for me when you mentioned that as something very original and not something that people really talk about. Like, oh, I actually have to show up with my ex-husband. Like I'm not the wife anymore. I'm the mom to the kids. And what changes there? What's the difference that needs to happen?
Yeah, and thank you for saying that and asking that question. One of the things that I really talk about in when I coach about co-parenting and, in my co-parenting course is that the reason we have such a hard time shifting into just becoming a co-parent with our ex is because we are still wearing the ex-wife hat. And part of what reclaiming your identity and voice does for you is for you to figure out who it is that you are as a person. So who is Wendy? Instead of who is Wendy as ex-wife and mom. Now it's just Wendy and mom. And so it's about really shedding that ex-wife identity because it doesn't exist anymore. And if you want to choose to have that identity attached to you, then you're going to continue to default into old past behaviors. The triggers are going to get you every which way to Sunday. And so the first step is really recognizing that your relationship to your ex is now as mom and dad. And the way that I coach my clients around, the first question, it's like, well, how the heck am I supposed to do that? Like, I either don't like this man, I don't trust this man, or, I can't believe he's taking care of my kids. It's like, well, okay, so what do you have control over? Well, I have control over me. I have control over my kids. Great. As it relates to your now co-parent, right? You have no say. You have no control over what is happening over there. Guys, let me save you the trouble. stop the texting, stop the emailing, stop doing this. And, the kids are telling me that the helicopter ex-wife parenting, it just does not work. And what does work is when you are able to instead, as mom, in relation to your kids, is to really hold space for them around what their experience is being at dad's. And the way in which you relate to your ex, well, until you're able to really take responsibility for how you showed up and what it is that you want to do differently moving forward, that whole, process of learning about yourself and moving into a new identity is how it is that you get to show up differently in this relationship. And what that also kind of ripples into is when you step into co-parent instead of ex-wife or husband, it also allows you to start listening to understand instead of listening to respond. So many times, think about conversations that you've had with your former spouse. I can remember back to conversations that I had with my ex before we got to the place that we are now. And I was just ready to cut him off because he would say one thing and I would make an assumption and I would, just getting in there to react and or respond. Versus now, I actually let him finish his sentence and I take a beat. And then I think, okay, well, what has to do with the kids and what is just extra commentary that has nothing to do with them, because that doesn't matter. So it's about responding to information that has to do with your kids, not having to do with your feelings. And the biggest tip that I can give your audience is when you are engaging in conversation with your ex, imagine your kids are standing right there.
That's a great tip.
You're going to speak very differently your kids can grab your phone, guys. I don't know. Somehow my kids know my password, even every time I change it. And if they were to go into my text messages and to see my conversation with their dad, there is nothing in that chain that I would feel embarrassed about or ashamed about or have them think any differently. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't phone calls, right? Where we get into disagreements and I'm not proud of myself all the time, but I never put it in writing. And it's because I don't want my kids to ever see something. So
that makes so much sense.
If you can just step into that place of just imagine your kids are right there, how would you respond and communicate if they heard every word? And that is all you need to remember when you are conversing with your co-parent.
Oh, that's so beautifully said and so crucial. So I understand you have a free gift for our listeners, which is around handling your inner critic. Would you say a word about that before we wrap up?
Yeah, of course. We all have so many what I call, inner critics. You can call them your negative inner voices. And man, do they talk really loud. And for some reason, we tend to listen to those voices more so than we listen to the quiet ones, which are really our inner truth and what's best for us. So I would love to gift your listeners with a downloadable PDF where they can learn how to distinguish the voices and to really start paying attention to what their truth is and to silence those little pesty, I almost see it's like an angel and a devil on your shoulder. So quiet the devil and let the angel really start speaking to you.
Oh, that's so great. I'm so excited for them to have that because I work a lot with the inner critic too. And I think it's so central to our ability to show up in a new way is befriending, changing our relationship to those voices so that they're not hijacking our conversations.
Exactly. Because they do.
They do. Because they do. Exactly. They really do. Yes. Thank you so much. It's been so great to talk with you. I always love when we get to be with each other and chat and I think it's so key what you're doing because there's just not enough support out there for this transition on the emotional, spiritual, really, rebuilding your identity kind of level. And so I'm super behind your mission and excited for everyone who gets to work in your space. So
thank you. The feeling is mutual.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. I feel like we have such a natural synergy.
Yes.
So this has been Divorce, the Alchemy of Divorce with Wendy Sterling, who I just adore. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And until next time, folks, remember that a great relationship starts with you.